Hello, and welcome to today's lecture on Hades. I'm your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we are going to talk about the Lord of the Underworld, a god so monstrous that his name is still a synonym for the fiery abyss of hell. But this conception didn't necessarily apply in antiquity. Hades isn't some fire-breathing monster. And in fact, in some ways, he was actually credited with sending up very positive things from the world below. So let's go ahead and take a closer look as we journey into Hades.
Hades was one of three brothers born to the Titans Cronus and Rhea. Along with Zeus and Poseidon, Hades drew lots to determine which realm he would rule. And that realm, of course, turned out to be the Underworld. You can identify Hades using his symbols of power, the scepter and the throne. But perhaps surprisingly, you can also identify him based on his symbols of wealth, a cornucopia, or a weird little crown that's often described as a basket of grain coming out of his head. This starts to make sense once you think of the fact that as the god of the underworld, he's responsible in large part for sending plants and minerals up through the soil. There are few temples and festivals associated with Hades, and perhaps this isn't very surprising considering that both the gods and mortals wanted to avoid spending too much time hanging around death. But this lack of sanctuaries and rituals also provides a valuable insight into the role of Hades in the process of death.
So what this lack of temples and sanctuaries suggests to us is that Hades actually had very little say in either how you died, or when you died, or what happened to you after you died, hence the lack of worship.
To understand Hades in the Greek conception of life after death, it is necessary to first comprehend the Greeks' vision of the cosmos. This varies from period to period and place to place, but in general, the Greeks considered the universe to be a giant sphere. Overarching everything was Olympus, home of the gods. Below them existed the vault of the heavens, Helios, the sun, Selene, the moon, and all the clouds existed within this realm. Under the heavens was Earth, where mortals dwelt. Mountains at the edge of the world held up the pillars of heaven, and rivers of ocean surrounded the land of the living. The Underworld, it turns out, is exactly that. The realm of Hades was conceived of as being physically underneath the earth. It is here that most souls would wander for eternity, and this is why few places and shrines to Hades are located near deep, dark caves, like this one at Eleusis. But for the most wicked, Tartarus lay even deeper than Hades itself. The abyss served as the torturous prison for those who heinously mistreated the gods. And at the bottom of the abyss lay Chaos, the first of divinities, the void from which all else arose.
But Hades isn't all bad. In addition to lording over the souls, Hades is also in charge in terms of sending things up from the underworld. Really good things, like plants and grain and trees, as well as minerals and ore. These things that are really useful in daily life. And for that reason, one of Hades' main epithets is Pluton, or wealth. And it's from that nickname that we actually get the Roman or Latin name for Hades, which of course is Pluto.
The general lack of shrines, rituals, festivals, and worship of Hades suggests that he had little control over the elements of death. He could not determine when you died, or how you died, or what happened after you died. He does not pass judgment on souls, or bring them down to the underworld, and generally seems rather uninterested in them. So the logical question then is, what does Hades actually do? Well, first, he receives the souls when they are brought to him to the underworld by Hermes, and thus he is commonly known by his epithet Polydegmon. And as the souls are brought down below, he sits upon his underworld throne and rules. He ensures that none leave this realm, and in many ways remains aloof. For this reason, one of Hades' main epithets was the Chthonian Zeus, quite literally the Zeus of the underworld.
So Hades is very different than the conception of something like Satan or the devil in Western religion. He's not breathing fire and torturing souls for eternity. He's also very different than somebody like St. Peter holding the keys to the pearly gates. He's not deciding who gets in and who doesn't. Instead, he's receiving the souls, ruling over them, and making sure that they don't escape.
If Hades seems a bit boring, most of the souls that enter his realm live equally boringly for all of eternity. Nearly everyone who dies enters the fields of asphodel, wandering aimlessly and a little glumly, forever and ever and ever. From Greek literature, we can glean that the souls of the deceased retain their look and their personality, but like a ghost today, they cannot be touched. Some of the truly blessed, and by blessed I mean heroic and extraordinary, are able to enter the Elysian Plain or the White Island, two areas of eternal bliss. Heracles, for instance, heads there long after his labors are completed.
But this doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want in daily life and still get away with it. For those truly wicked, especially the ones who cross the gods, there is a rather bad place known as Tartarus, the abyss even below Hades, where the evil souls are tortured for all of eternity.
The giant Tityus, for example, tried to rape Leto, mother of Artemis and Apollo, and was chained to a rock only to have his liver constantly eaten by vultures. Tantalus stole the drink and food of the gods, nectar and ambrosia, from the Olympians. He later tries to serve up his own son, Pelops, when having Zeus over for dinner. And for this he spent eternity in a river, with a fruit tree dangling overhead. Yet any time he went to drink, the river receded. And any time he went to grab fruit, the tree pulled back. Forever he would be stuck, yearning for what was just out of reach. And for this reason, we call similar things in today's world tantalizing. And then, of course, there's Sisyphus, the mythological founder of Corinth and supreme trickster. Twice he outsmarted death. First by tying up Thanatos, the personification of death itself, and later by convincing Hades to allow him back up into the world of the living to instruct his wife how to make the proper death rituals. Of course, once up there, he had no intention of going back to Hades, instead living until a ripe old age. As punishment, Sisyphus was condemned to forever push a rock up a hill, but every time he approached the top, the rock would come crashing back down to the bottom. Such impossible demands we now call Sisyphean tasks.
So just to reiterate, most of the souls are not tortured, they're not in some land of the blessed, they're just kind of wandering rather glumly around the fields of asphodel for all of eternity. But that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. You gotta make sure you don't cross the gods, or you might end up in Tartarus like good old Sisyphus and Tantalus.
Mythologically speaking, once dead, the soul was brought down to Hades by Hermes the messenger god and his helpers, Thanatos, death itself, and Hypnos, the personification of sleep. And there one would wander, well, pretty much for eternity. But what actually happened to actual people to send them on their journey to the afterlife? Greek funerary rituals were a three-step process. First was the prosthesis. Here the body would be laid out, cleaned, dressed, and a token or coin would be placed in the mouth. Payment for the ferryman Charon to allow the soul to cross the river Styx. Bystanders during this time would perform ritual grief, tearing at their hair, striking their body, and scratching their faces. Second, we have the ekphora. This was a procession from the preparation site to the grave site. The ritual mourning continues during this procession, with women lamenting and singing dirges, while men raise their hands in mourning. And finally, we have the feast and visitation. For the first one, the ghost of the deceased is actually invited to hang out and participate. And for a month after, the family will head back to the grave to give offerings to ensure the safe travel of the soul to the underworld.
So one of the really interesting things here is that the rites and rituals of the deceased is frequently more about the living than the dead. And what I mean by that is that these kind of performative rituals allow the family to grieve openly, but it also allows the family to build connections with other friends and families of the deceased. It's also a way for that family to show off their wealth, a way of conspicuous consumption to establish their position within Greek society. So the Greek conception of Hades really gives us an insight into their thoughts about life after death. Namely that the god of the underworld doesn't have much control over when you go or where you go or what happens once you get there. Moreover, we need to shift our gaze from Hades as a torturer of souls to somebody who kind of lords over them, rules them, but also sends up good, useful things to the people above ground, right? Plants, as well as minerals and ores. And then one final thing to keep in mind is that when we think of the rituals of the dead, we want to think of those just as much about the living establishing one's place in Greek society as they are about the deceased themselves. So just a couple of the takeaway points from our discussion of Hades, Lord of the Underworld.